Hi there, I'm County Executive Joe Parisi, and welcome to this episode of Parisi in the Park. Today we're here with Chris James, the Dane County Park Planning Manager, and we're going to be talking about the Lower Yahara Trail. Well, Chris, here we are at the beginning of the Lower Yahara boardwalk, part of the trail, as we were coming from Lake Farm Park on the Madison side, headed toward McFarland. This is just an amazing trail, and the feedback we get from the community is that it's just an outstanding place to be, and they're so happy that it's finally complete. You know, what was the origin of this trail, and how did it come to be?
Yeah, and this is a perfect place to talk about that because actually the original concept for the trail was to follow the rail bed that's right here next to us. Huh. And at that time, McFarland had seen all the work we were doing on Capital City Trail, and they wanted to be connected into it. And so obviously the rail is still active today and didn't go away. We had thought that this would eventually be abandoned, and then the rail would become the trail, and it didn't. It's still here. So we decided to actually build the trail parallel to the railroad tracks. And we actually had a pretty successful working relationship with the railroad that you don't see too often or hear about on other projects.
That's great.
And they actually even helped us bringing some of the materials into the project. So that was kind of the start of it, though, is just McFarland wanted to be connected to Capital City Trail. And this was in our county parks and open space plan as a concept for over 30 years. And so when Cap City Trail was built, that really pushed us to make this connection across the lake.
Excellent. So from the time you decided that, okay, now's the time to build this, obviously you don't just go out and start digging shovels into the ground. What did that process look like, and how long did it take, from the time you decided the time is right till it was actually open for people?
Yeah, so when we decided that this was going to be a project and we were going to pursue planning and all the permits and everything that went with it, it was about 9 years.
Wow.
9 years of planning, design, and permitting until construction started.
And then once construction started, how long did this project go?
2 years.
2 years,
So
yeah.
That is so typical of trail projects. They take years to plan, design, and permit, a year or two to build. These lands around here are very significant to the Ho-Chunk Nation. In fact, Lake Farm Park is on the National Register of Historic Places. So we knew right at the start that there was going to have to be a lot of coordination and collaboration with the Ho-Chunk Nation. And it actually turned out to be a huge positive because we were having impacts, but we were making it very clear that we wanted to be sensitive about doing the right things and even using construction techniques that would avoid impacts. And I feel like that was a real gateway to the county's relationship building with Ho-Chunk Nation. And as it turned out at the end, they embraced the trail also.
Yeah, and I mean, just the fact that the trail's here, and I think it's important for us to talk about the history of this area. I think it educates and makes people more aware and sensitive to what was here long before our current generations were here, and that Native Americans, this was their home.
Yeah, so true. And also, since the trail has been completed, we have continued to work with Ho-Chunk Nation on interpretive and educational signage that is actually going to be installed on the trail to talk about that history. So the story continues.
That's great. don't have to be on this trail very long to see how unique it is compared to a lot of other places in the region. Could you talk to us about some of the unique features of this trail?
Yeah, there's actually quite a few. And before we even built the trail, I think one of the incredibly unique things about it is just the collaboration of partners it took to build the trail. And I get that question a lot, what's so special about it? And from a planning perspective, I think it's the collaboration. We had DNR, Army Corps, Ho-Chunk Nation, City of Madison, Village of McFarland, the town of Dunn out here. It was endless, the people who wanted to see this happen and be a part of it. So that was just incredible to have that much cooperation between all those agencies. And then when you get to the trail itself, well, this is often kind of billed as the longest bicycle pedestrian boardwalk in Wisconsin for sure, and some sources say even North America.
Wow.
And there are longer ones, but almost every one is a rail to trail project where they repurposed a railroad bridge. This is arguably one of the longest in the Midwest for sure that was built just for this purpose. And I think that's a big hats off to Dane County too for supporting and building something like this and taking the initiative to do it. There's a lot of just the trail itself. This decking that we're walking on right now is a composite decking. There's just miles and miles of this if you looked at the linear feet of it. And that's a very sustainable approach that we don't have to come in and replace it all the time. We've got these bump outs on here so people can get off the trail and out of the way of traffic coming through here. And I think if you want to just talk about the trail and being on it, the views are incredible.
Yeah.
And as we were talking on the way out here, I'm amazed at how much native vegetation is coming in out here. It's just everything is coming in how we thought it might. And so that's exciting to see.
That's great. And as far as the construction of the trail, we talked a little bit before about wanting to be respectful of the native lands. And part of what we incorporated into building this was, whereas my understanding, whereas one would usually kind of do pile driving along these trails and put the columns down into the earth, but we did it differently here. Could you talk about that?
We did, and that was a real pivot point in the design and the planning process, because we knew this section we're on right now, that there's really not much. This used to be underwater, even in glacial times. But as we get further to the east here, we were definitely aware that there were cultural features that we wanted to avoid. So we actually, midstream, changed the design from a piling design to a floating design. So the boardwalk actually just floats on the surface, and there are no impacts to subsurface. That became kind of like a standard for us now for all areas that we know there's cultural and wetlands to have just about zero impact.
That's interesting, and I take it that's a pretty unique way to build something like this.
It is, and way back, Dane County Parks actually was the first entity that ever proposed and did a floating boardwalk, and this was probably going on 25, 30 years ago now, and at that time you couldn't build any trails in wetland areas at all. And my predecessor, Jim Miller, actually came up with this idea to build a boardwalk on pans that would float. And we took that idea for this trail and just beefed it up so it would support the weight limits that this does. We actually drive trucks on this trail sometime, but it's the same concept, and I always feel kind of proud I didn't come up with it, but Dane County Parks actually came up with that idea.
So Chris, this is known as Phase 1 of the Lower Yahara Trail. What can you tell us about Phase 2?
We are actually starting construction of Phase 2 in about 1 month.
Excellent.
So Phase 2 spans between Fish Camp County Park down on Lake Kaganza, and it goes kind of across the east shore of the lake to Lake Kaganza State Park, and exits out on Williams Drive at the other end. So that is another really significant piece because it's very similar to what we're walking on now. We're kind of skirting the edge of the shoreline and going across a pretty large wetland. Same thing, low impact boardwalk. But once that piece is in place, I really feel like the remaining connection kind of between Fish Camp and McFarland and even Lake Kaganza State Park and Stoughton are going to come in pretty quick because those projects, in my opinion, are much easier than what we're doing here.
Excellent. And so, for the viewers who aren't aware, the phase 2 of the trail, the Fish Camp part, that's in Stoughton, Wisconsin, right?
Yes.
And
yep.
now we're in between Madison and McFarland. So could you give us a view of what this ultimately will look like when all of those connections have been completed?
I would say the overall vision for this is really hooking the Capital City Trail by Lunny Lake Farm Park behind us here down to Stoughton. And that's about, I think, 11 and a half miles or so. And so the goal is to have an off-road trail hooking Stoughton up in that region all the way into Madison. But what else is kind of exciting is it hooks into several other state trails. The Military Ridge State Trail, the Badger State Trail, eventually the Glacial Drumlin Trail coming up here, and just the vast network of trails all around Madison.
Yeah. Chris, what's exciting about this when you look at ultimately the fact that we're going to be able to go from Madison to Stoughton all off-road on nice off-road paved safe bike trails, there's just so many benefits to that for our community. First of all, it's just a much safer way to travel for bicyclists, and we will be saving lives and reducing injuries for bicyclists by providing this safe alternative. It's also a great way to get out and see the basically nature's bounty in Dane County, and to visit our parks in an alternative mode that allows you to experience it like really no other mode of transportation. And then we also look at, we're very concerned in Dane County about our environmental footprint, and what we're doing with these trails is also providing people a way for clean, healthy recreation, as well as for a lot of folks another option for commuting in basically a no carbon way. So the benefits are many, and I would imagine someone like you, who's pretty much in charge in Dane County of making all this happen, and we know there are a lot of people involved, but this is what you get up and come to work to do every day, is to plan and to implement and to see these things through in what is often a multi-year process. I'm curious, for you on a personal level, could you tell us a little bit about your journey? How did you end up where you are, and where did you develop your passion for doing this kind of work?
Yeah, and it started out early, and right away my parents, when I was a really little kid, would take us out to parks all the time. I mean, that's what we did on the weekends, and even after work sometime, we would just go out and hike at parks and take a few trips up north or whatever. And that really, I think, kind of instilled appreciation for parks and just hiking and trails. My mom was a huge advocate for recycling and even clean water back in the 1970s.
That's
and
great.
She used to go to schools and talk about it. It was just, I was just along for the ride, but it was very impressionable on me.
An impact, huh?
And as I got older, when I went to school at UW, Phil Lewis was another big impact in my life. And Phil talked a lot about the regional connectivity of communities and providing green space connections between communities.
Yeah.
All of that stuff just kept building and really led to a passion. And I can't tell you how thrilled I was when I actually got hired by Dane County Parks to be able to do this all the time.
Yeah.
It's just a dream job.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us today and teaching us all about the Lower Yahara Trail. It's been extremely interesting and we really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you out on the trail sometime.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Parisi in the Park. We'll see you next time.